This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Round one of the NFL draft is complete. We move on to day two, where double the picks are made. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's always one of the better days watching the NFL draft. What's up, everybody? Ken Swanson here with my friends Matty Lane, Craig Stouts. Matthew, Craig, how we feeling? Matthew, how we feeling?
Matthew, Craig, how you doing, buddy?
Feeling pretty great after day one. The Chiefs landed Xavier Worthy in a small trade up. That was a phenomenal time. I think it made a lot of sense for the team. That makes the end of round one a lot of fun. That makes Thursday night here a lot of fun for us. And then heading into Friday, still having your second round pick kind of right in the middle of the day shortens it up. It makes it not feel so long that you're not picking at the very beginning or just the very end. So I'm good. I'm overall pretty excited. I think the Chiefs have done a pretty good job so far. We'll see how they round it out, but Xavier Worthy's an exciting player that they get in round one. So that starts a good start to the draft, Greg.
Absolutely, it's a good start to the draft and a potential wide receiver one type player for the Kansas City Chiefs without having to give up pick 64. That matters a lot. Now, they did have a pick swap, again, a 3-for-3 for Xavier Worthy. So as it currently stands, they are not picking in round 3 of the NFL draft.
Yeah.
But that 64th pick is one that I really wanted to protect personally, so I'm glad they were able to still get a guy that they want. Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate that. But, yeah, no, I really like that they were able to keep pick 64.
And I'm not entirely sure, just before we get too far into some of these players, I'm not sure the Chiefs still don't find a way to make two picks on Friday. I still think that there's a possibility that they are making two. I could see them maneuvering the board a little bit. This could potentially be where next year's draft assets start sneaking into, the Chiefs' plans a little bit here too. Like a future third. If you give up the Titans' third and one of those fourth round picks that you just got, there you go. You're probably able to get somewhere into round 3, and that means, hey, look, you're making 2 picks. So I know the Chiefs are going to pick, in the middle of Friday, at pick 64 most likely, but I'm not going to be surprised at all if it winds up being 2 picks, over Friday. But let's get into some of these players that, we're kind of interested in here for this team. Looking at some of the, best players available just left on the board at the top. Matty, give me a few of the players that, you think, you were a little surprised maybe they didn't get their name called day one, or maybe you're a little bit of a, might be players that get their name called early.
And not so much just guys that I'm not surprised they didn't go round one.
Yeah.
I think round one actually didn't have too many surprises. I think it was relatively chalky. There's a couple guys we
Ricky Pearsall.
I don't think it's wild though. He was probably slated to go top 50, right? Yeah. Which is not wild. Yeah. I'm going to go to the tackle position. I think a lot of people had the Chiefs kind of pegged to potentially take an offensive tackle at the end of round one. So guys like Kingsley Sumatea or Patrick Paul are both still on the board. Those are developmental tackles. Both could play left tackle. That would be great for the Chiefs in round 2. They're still on the board. There's a chance the Chiefs can either trade up for or potentially get one of those guys towards the end of round 2. I would expand that list out to even include a Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame. He's another guy I think that fits right in there with those guys. So there's some offensive tackles still available that could make sense for the Chiefs or in round 2. Even if you want to expand it out, just sticking to that same position. I like a Roger Rosengarten out of Washington, Brandon Coleman. Like the offensive tackle position, I don't think there's anybody that's going to slide in as a day one starter. Mm-hmm. I didn't think they were going to be looking at that at the end of round 1 anyway. So the fact that all of those guys minus Tyler Guyton was the only one that's off the board at the end of round 1 are all still available, I think that's good news for the Chiefs.
Yeah, if the Chiefs walk out of here with an offensive tackle that's more of a project at 64, you feel really good about it.
Feel a lot better than some of the scenarios we talked about with him reaching for a tackle.
Trading back to pick 40 and taking in Patrick Paul because an Xavier Worthy isn't going to be available. Now all of a sudden, if you take a Kingsley Sumatea at 64, you feel really good. Like, again, a Xavier Worthy, Kingsley Sumatea start to this draft, you're over the moon about. Mm-hmm. I'm also looking a little bit defensive tackle. Didn't go off the board. Johnny Newton did not go off the board a little bit. The corner position did not go off the board than we expected. Cooper DeJean was still available. Yeah, thank you,
buddy. We're getting there, buddy.
Yeah, but I mean,
and Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Kool-Aid McKinstry also didn't go. So that's going to push some players down a little bit. Maybe a Mason Smith or a Chris Jenkins at the defensive tackle position is available. Maybe a Max Melton now is comfortably available for the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's one of those because they didn't have to overpay in a trade up now. They've got pick 64 left. They can play the board a little bit more and really take value at this position, maybe than they wouldn't have been able to before if they had to really trade up in round one.
One comment Brett Veach said that they're basically just trying to find someone that can help them play.
Yeah.
That can play and help them contribute on day 2 of the draft at 64. So that's something obviously to keep in mind. So, obviously we go to the tackles first, right?
For sure.
And we pay attention to those because, the Chiefs have been heavily linked to tackles. I think they wanted to try to come out of the first round with a tackle, but those guys were going off the board way too early.
Way early.
Way too early.
Way too early.
Way early.
Way too early.
So they kind of
Way too early. Like way too early.
Way too early.
Fell out of range there. But they still wound up getting a good player. But yeah, that second tier of developmental tackles I think is definitely worth paying attention to, and it's guys that we've spent some time talking about. But what outside of that, we're kind of hoping receivers, I think, fall off the board at this point, right? Like we're kind of hoping there's a large run on receivers, most likely. Or
I'm torn. I'm honestly torn. I like this. I like the day 2 of this wide receiver class. I'm not gonna lie. I like the day 2 of this wide receiver class. And if I'm sitting here and I'm staring at, I like Xavier Worthy, but he clearly, I don't want to say he's a limited player, but there's things on the football field that he can't do because he is going to be light. No matter what, you're never going to line him up against press.
And that's okay, by the way.
No, that's fine. Yeah. But between him and Rashee Rice, if neither one of them are going to excel lining up out wide versus press coverage, maybe you consider another wide receiver that's good at that. So maybe a Javon Baker's there at 64. Maybe it's in round 4. I don't know if Jalen Polk's the guy you want to go up against press coverage, but maybe you find somebody that can go up there and line up against press coverage consistently out there, and it still kind of makes sense. But yeah, I mean, probably you're okay with wide receivers starting to come off the board now would be my thought process.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't get too deep. I think the Chiefs should double dip in that regard.
Fine with them double dip.
That can be a day 3 double dip.
Sure.
I don't need to do that. The spot that I'm really paying attention to is corner, because it did not come off the board the way that I think everybody expected.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, a Cooper DeJean, a Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Enos Rakestraw, Kamari Lassiter, TJ Tampa, Max Melton, Mike Sainristil. These are all guys that were early round 2 guys when we were doing some of these mock exercises, or late round 1 guys. Now all of a sudden you're going to have if the Chiefs are really truly going to take best player available, it's kind of looking a little bit like it might be corner. Because, I mean, if we're looking at this, it's not out of the realm of possibility that one of these guys who has no business falling to the end of round 2 is available in that scenario. The Chiefs don't have to trade up. Yes, I would like an offensive tackle. I would prefer an offensive tackle, but the best player available scenario might truly be at cornerback.
I'm a little hopeful on tackle, just a little bit hopeful.
A little
tackle.
bit. Yeah, I'm not out.
It's just because so many went so fast that there's a lot of offensive linemen going off the board. I think you're going to see some interior offensive linemen fall off the board before the Chiefs pick. I think a Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon is going to go off the board before the Chiefs pick.
Quick.
You think
he's going to go quick?
I would anticipate Zach Frazier, and then you're rooting for a Cooper Beebe or a Dom Pooney or one of those guys that go off the board a little bit early there too. If that happens, then I think there's a chance that the Chiefs could be in a decent position to get one of those developmental tackles at a more appropriate value instead of reaching for one of those players like we were talking we were, I don't want to say worried about, but it was one of the scenarios we were talking about is they just take a developmental tackle in the first round. The board might fall if a lot of receivers are going, which it feels like a lot of teams held back and showed some restraint early on the receivers, and the run on receivers really didn't start until the back end of the first round. And now here we are, maybe more receivers come off the boards, interior offensive linemen, and then now you're sitting in a better spot to maybe take one of those tackles there.
I think tackle's a good spot. I'm going to stick with tackle, but to go to the other side of the ball. Craig had mentioned Johnny Newton didn't come off the board, and that might result in a Mason Smith or a Chris Jenkins fall down. That's true, but I mean, Michael Hall Jr., the other guy goes down. Rukaro could fall down. Devondre Sweat. There's plenty of defensive tackles that could still be in contention for your best player available at 64.
Mm-hmm.
To Kent's point earlier, Brett Veach is saying they're looking for guys that could come and help them, early on, essentially. All these guys we're talking about could come in and play a rotational role on this defensive line early on, especially while Charles Omenihu was hurt. So I just think the defensive tackle spot, along with the cornerback spot, you might have a more clear path than offensive tackle to jump in on day 1 or in year 1 and kind of have an impact for this team, have a come in, lend a helping hand, this team trying to go to a three-peat. Now that's the only thing that matters. It's just, I think you can make a pretty easy case, and defensive tackle or cornerback might have, unless big runs come on both positions, might have the best value available at pick 64.
Now, that being said, I can definitely see a scenario here where a Patrick Paul and a Kingsley Sumataya are still available at pick 64. It hasn't been one of those scenarios.
So the NFL split on them.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And it seems like teams are not like over the moon about the fact that, they want to spend this kind of pick on this sort of project tackle or anything like that. So it's not one where you're looking at it and you're going, oh, yeah, no, it makes sense that these guys are going to go before this or before and now. These guys were like consistently mocked, not just to the Chiefs, but in round one as offensive tackles that really going to truly matter. These are the types of guys that year in and year out that we see fall down the road a little bit, no more. The guys that we see at the top of round two, the Adonai Mitchells, the Jackson Power Johnsons, those guys that are kind of consistently round one that we just don't think about. Those guys are clearly going to be round one. Those are the guys that get drafted at the top of day two. We may see a slight fall from some of these project tackles a little bit more, and boy howdy, I'm excited. I hope if one of those is available at pick 60.
Oh, hopefully, and I think there's a couple things there with those guys. We're gonna take a break. We'll be back right after this.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
Thanks, everybody, hanging out with us. We appreciate you. Make sure you're checking out all of our content at KC Sports Network. This week, we are going to have you covered for Friday and Saturday of the draft. We don't just stop at round one. We cover every single pick of the draft in our live streams here at KC Sports Network. There's one thing that raised a red flag for me a little bit when we were looking at, Daniel Jeremiah releases his top 150, right? And Daniel Jeremiah is the most connected person, right? When it comes to, I think he's one of the most connected people in this entire industry when it comes to all this. And his top 150 will take into consideration things like character, things like medicals. Seeing him be basically on an island on the Kingsley Suamataia and the Patrick Paul in the hundreds raised some red flags for me, for sure. And so I wonder, you have to wonder, and we won't ultimately know, right? But you wonder if, they got flagged for medical, they got flagged for character or something like that. Just him being out on an island, he seems like the only person out that far. Like, I can get being a little bit different, right? But, you see Patrick Paul being, 61 on the consensus board. That's about where we have him. Kingsley Suamataia, I don't know where he's at on the 42 on the consensus board. Like, these are two guys that are largely considered round two picks getting pushed that far out. Maybe you wonder, maybe there's, something there with one of those things that helps the Chiefs get into an advantageous position to, try to take a swing on one of those guys that maybe there's a ding there for them.
And just to add to that a little bit more before we toss it over here to Matty, ESPN's, consensus board with best available. Patrick Paul is the 100th best available player. The 100th still. Not like, hey, the 100th overall. He's still the 100th best available player within this draft class based on, stuff that the Jordan Reed, the Matt, the Kuipers are seeing.
You start hearing some stuff, yeah.
You start hearing some stuff a little bit more. So
we see this happen every year with some guys, so you just wonder.
Well, yeah, we absolutely do. So you kind of take some of that information, especially as picks starts flying off the board. You start to see the full picture of some of this come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And as these guys, as you get into day two and they continue to fall, maybe you just know some of these other guys that the Jordan Reeds, again, the Mel Kuipers, the Matt Millers are hearing about are sitting there going, oh, that guy didn't go off the board. Okay, well, I need to move this other guy that's clearly below him way down the board based on what I'm hearing so far.
I think that's just the nature of the beast when you're dealing with developmental tackles. I mean, I think it's just what it is. Like, you have two guys in Patrick Paul and Sumatea who we as Chiefs fans have spent a lot of time investing into their tape and figuring out how they're going to work and how they're not, that I think as a fan base have probably talked them up a little bit more than some other fan bases that maybe don't have a desperate need.
They're 42 and 61 on the consensus board for literally everyone.
And that's how you get guys like Daniel Jeremiah or the ESPN consensus board having them in the hundreds.
Like a little overcorrection.
It's not, I don't think it's overcorrection. It's just, I think you can, when you watch them, you can see different stuff, right? Sure. And like, I think some people can very clearly watch them and see like, oh, wow, this player looks like he's going to be really good. He has all the traits. This other person can watch them and be like, I don't know. It might take that guy some time. So like, I think they're the type of player that can have a very wide variance on where they are stacked up in a draft board. And it kind of makes sense that they would still be available right now. Like we spend a lot of time talking about, like you were talking about where Sumate is. His variance on the consensus board is still 121 picks.
Yeah.
Like that's a
crazy.
Huge, yeah,
pretty wild.
Patrick Poles is 117, right? So like, yeah, they might be
big spreads out there.
They might be ranked pretty high, but the variance is also very high with them versus like some other guys nearby might only have a variance of 80 picks or 90 picks. Like, so it's just they're all over the place. It seems like.
Well, and that's what happens at day two. Like you start getting a wider consensus with that. It's not it's clearly definitive in some of that. So, maybe the Chiefs are looking at this on this board and they're saying, okay, so with the tackles that are left, we really like a Blake Fisher. Maybe a Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame is at the top of our board, but maybe we throw a little bit of curveball. And you've got Kieran Amadaji, out of Yale.
Close. That's good. Good, buddy.
Maybe that's the second guy on their board instead of maybe a Kingsley Sumataya or a Patrick Paul or a Roger Rosengarten or something like that. It's going to be interesting to see how they attack the offensive tackle position. I'm glad that they didn't reach, and simultaneously, I am excited about the approach that they could potentially take here at day two, because I could be really over the moon about offensive tackle after day two.
I think that's the hope, right? Is, that you feel good about this pick, right? Like, is there any positions that you don't want them to take?
I think right now, with trading away the third round pick with 95, dropping, to trading 95 for that fourth round pick, going with like an interior offensive lineman in round 2 would feel like a little bit of a stretch for me. It's just, I don't see that impact coming in this year. And even still, yes, if next year it would be a pick for 2025, but getting rid of that third round pick, again, right now they could still make moves, getting rid of that third round pick and just kind of exiting the day 2 of the draft with just a future guy, a potential future replacement for like a Trey Smith or a Joe Tooney would be a little bit much for me. I think you could probably stack safety in there as well. I don't know if I love the idea of a completely future move on safety or interior offensive line with the limited draft picks in the top 100.
Now, that being said, if they trade back in for a guy, I feel a little bit better about that. Utilize some assets in a little bit different way. One tight end was taken in round 1. Not out of the ordinary. No linebackers. Again, not out of the ordinary. No safeties. No running backs.
No defensive players, pretty much.
It was very few defensive players, but there weren't very many of those 4 positions that I listed there, and so I'm not willing. And fortunately for the Chiefs, tight end is really the only one that I'm looking at there that I'm going, oh wow, that's a definite position that the Chiefs probably needed to address sooner rather than later. But the depth of this class is not in day 2. For the tight end position. Yeah. So those 4 positions would be the ones that I'd look at and go, maybe let's stay away from those a little bit more, because I just don't think that the value is right and the fit with this team is right.
Matty, give me one receiver if they're at 64 on the board. Is it Javon Baker?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think he makes a lot of sense. I mean, that or like a Keon Coleman. I think both those guys... Both those guys kind of pair well with Xavier.
Still kicking around.
Would you?
They pair well with they pair well with Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice moving forward. Not even just this year, but like that combination moving forward. If you were replacing Hollywood Brown with presumably Xavier Worthy, and then you were also adding another guy to that mix and what it's going to be versus just looking for a Travis Kelce replacement, I'm thinking in my mind, how do we go ahead and replace kind of Travis Kelce's, not role, but like his impact where he wins with another wide receiver as he gets older necessarily. And I think a guy like Keon or Javon Baker, who does it a little differently, they could play that role. So yeah, you want to go with one of those two guys at 64? I think I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I feel good about those guys as well. As much as I would like to add my guy, Malik Washington, to this roster, I think where they sit right now, I don't know that he makes a ton of sense anymore. And that makes me sad because he's going to be a really good football player in the league. Malachi Corley, though, out of Western Kentucky, like, you want a gadgety guy that's going to run through some guys' faces a little bit and create some yards after the catch, to couple with a Hollywood Brown, to couple with the Xavier Worthy, to go alongside the run after the catch ability of a Rashee Rice, even with the run after the catch ability of a Travis Kelce, as he gets later in his age there. Like, you create a scenario where it's very difficult to defend this team because you have to have corners that are willing to come up and attack underneath. Also, you have to have guys that can defend over the top with a Hollywood Brown and an Xavier Worthy. So Malachi Corley maybe makes some sense based on what the Chiefs are doing there, just to try and create, a defensive coordinator's nightmare there, drafting a guy like that at 64.
What would you feel about a Jonathan Brooks at 64?
I wanted to ask you that question before we got out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Brooks at 64, how did you...
I don't want to draft a running back round 2.
I think I'm okay with it.
If it was Brooks, I think I'm okay with it. Any other running back, I'm not a fan of.
Yeah.
If it was Jonathan Brooks, who I think is a legitimate 3-down running back who you don't have to take off the field, he should run any run concept you ask. He can play on passing downs, whether in pass pro or as a receiver. He kind of checks all the boxes. I think he improves your running back position on every single down in every single situation over Isaiah Pacheco. That's not a knock on Pacheco. That's just that Brooks, I think, is that good. There's not a single situation where he's not your best running back option.
I totally agree. And especially when you're going to see more too high safety looks, with Worthy on the field. Like, I totally understand how he fits in there.
And he's young.
He's young. I would rather take a developmental tackle than drafting a running back in that scenario.
Yeah, there's 31 more picks before the Chiefs are scheduled to make their next selection. So, there's a lot of players that are going to fall off the board. Hopefully the Chiefs are put in an advantageous position to be able to take advantage and get a good player that makes some sense with their roster construction. We're going to find out, and we'll be here all day covering this draft, every single pick on Friday of rounds 2 and 3. Thank you all so much for listening, for watching, for supporting KC Sports Network. We appreciate you. We love you. We'll catch you later.